I actually got on my knees because I thought that's how you were supposed to do it. And I said it, and I meant it. And then 3 days later, I heard a voice. When I asked, what can I do for myself today that's positive? And I heard a voice, and it told me what to do. How you think about something contributes to the thing itself and informs the thing itself. We prefer to think of ourselves as victims to what we encounter, but in fact, that's not the case. So to move to a level of accountability to those things, how we perceive the government or the bank or all those things, that's what can allow change in other kinds of ways. When you reinforce the darkness, indeed it will rise. Indeed it will rise. Now when you pray for someone, I wish them well, that's all fine. That's all fine, but the realization of the divine, or knowing the presence of the divine, or knowing the presence of the divine where the other seems to be, or the situation is, or the situation is, actually alters the thing, or lifts the being to a higher tone, where change can occur, to know God, no means realize, and no means realize where God has been abandoned. Where God has been abandoned is restoration, to lift the thing, to see the thing in a higher octave. And a higher octave is for it to be made new,
I'd like to welcome back to the show returning champion, Paul Selig. How you doing, Paul?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming all the way down here to Next Level Soul Studios and joining me live. We've done, I think this is episode 5 that we've done.
It could well be.
I think this is the 5th one we've done together, and you're in a rare club of the 5-timer club. That have been on this show. That's how much I love having you and our conversations. And I really appreciate you coming down to do this live for the first time. So I appreciate it.
I'm really glad to be asked. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we're going to have an interesting conversation, but we're also going to be talking about your new film, a new film. Listen to me. I'm back in the olden days. Your new book, A World Made New, by the Guides. And we were just talking that you have no idea what this is anymore. You forgot what you wrote.
Mostly I forget what I wrote. I haven't done the audiobook yet. And it's when I sit down and I do the audiobook and I have to read the transcripts, that's really the first time that I really read the material.
Wow.
Because when the books are being dictated, I remember maybe a third of what comes through. Yeah.
I mean, I wish I had that kind of ability to just spit out books, because you spit them out once a year at least, right?
That's how it's been, yeah.
And how many years have you been doing? How many books do you have?
This is the 12th book.
And do they have a expiration of how many more they want to do, or is it just going to keep going?
Well, they've said that this book is the end of the teaching that began with the first book, which was called I Am the Word. Right. So this sort of is the completion of the first teaching, and they're starting another one. So I know that there's 2 more. I know that much. I don't know what they are yet, but they said we have 2 more that we want to dictate, so they'll come.
My gosh, kind of like Harry Potter, like after the first 7 books, or whatever, 6 books, I remember there were.
Yeah.
And now you're like, people are like, so are there more? Oh, yeah, there's a whole other series.
Well, I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know how long I can sit in a chair and do this. I mean, I'm grateful for it. I don't understand it.
Sure.
But every time with these books, because I don't even know what they're called until they deliver it. I don't know the title. I don't know anything. I sit in a chair and I hear, we have a book to write, and then they said this is chapter 1, and bang, 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 and that's how it comes. It's all spoken. There's no writing. So I don't even when I first had to transcribe the books from the recordings, I knew more because I was having to listen so carefully.
Right.
And now somebody else gets to do that, which is fine by me.
Paul, I mean, when our first conversation happened, I was fascinated with your kind of reluctant channel energy that you have. You're just kind of like, this is what I do. This is my life now. I kind of asked for it in that kind of way. And it's been years now. How long have you been channeling the guides?
They began dictating books through me in 2009, but I've been working with them since I was in my, I would say, early 30s. So it's a long time. It's 30 years of doing this kind of work. But it really developed. How I work now is completely different than how it started. Mm-hmm. When I started, I was hearing fragments of information for other people, or I was hearing instructions for working with energy. And I was really developed, I think, by them through my continued willingness to keep showing up for this stuff. because nobody knew that I was doing it. I had a small group, and that was it. I mean, I wasn't looking to be known.
That's the thing. You're very similar to me in that manner, because I truly, if I could be anonymous, I would.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you could be anonymous, you would. Because it's just not. I don't search for the spotlight.
Yeah.
I don't think you search for the spotlight, but we do it as part of our work, and we've agreed to do so. And I think that's probably best, because if you get too caught up in the spotlight or looking for it, it becomes dangerous.
I agree.
Yeah.
You know, the very first group that when I first knew I was going to do a group, and the guides said, you know, yes, do it, and they said, and don't advertise. And I went, okay. And then people started showing up that I had known on the street, and suddenly I had a full apartment full of people. And this was, you know, when I was maybe 32 years old. And it was really about letting the work itself be primary, not Paul being known for the work. I mean, I think of myself as a radio, you know, and I hold a broadcast, and that's really it. So, you know, my name goes on the cover of these things, but I didn't write them, and I don't feel that kind of pride around these things.
How do you still, you know, I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years now. Do you see yourself doing this moving forward for the rest of your life, this kind of work? Or is there going to be a point where you go, I think I'm good, I've done what I needed to do?
I don't know. I really don't know. I enjoy the work.
Okay.
I don't understand the work. It doesn't feel resolved for me.
In what sense?
Like, well, I don't know where it's going. I don't feel that I'm an enlightened being. You know, I'm growing enormously through this process. I'm a very different man than I used to be in many, many ways, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm still curious to know what's next. And the interesting thing about how they teach is they're always building on their teaching. So when they said, you know, there's 2 more books coming, at least that I know of, they actually said 3. 2 would be channeled, and 1 they want me to work on, which is basically a book about all the books. So sort of deconstructing the teaching over a series of chapters. So you can read the book and say, this is what they're talking about in these texts.
And they want you to write that.
I hope they're going to help, because I haven't read them. I've read some of them, you know, but I don't go back and study the books like some people do. And I have a good retention of the overall themes, because the themes are consistent. And how they're broken down in the text really is a progression. You know, they take their students through a way of becoming aware to them of themselves and energy in a way that I think doesn't, you know, blow them out into the stratosphere.
What I find fascinating, and I always tell people that if people always ask me about channeling, is it real, is it not? And you're one of the greatest doubters, or were at this kind of stuff. You're a very grounded human being. And you still, even to me, you're like, it's ridiculous that I'm doing this, but it is what it is. Yeah. I find it fascinating that you still are rolling with this in the way that you are. But I also find fascinating that you just said that you're not an enlightened being. So many people throughout history, anytime that there's a prophet or someone like that comes down the road that's giving you knowledge, they become idols. People idolize them. Yeah. I know that you have done everything to stamp that out as much as possible. And believe it or not, even in my world, people have started to talk about that with me. I'm like, no, guys, please. As you're going through this process, you've obviously said you've changed person. Have you evolved spiritually at all through this process? And where literally vibrationally, frequency wise?
I'm sure I have. I mean, that I don't question. You know, my abilities have changed. And I don't think of the abilities necessarily as proof of enlightenment. You know, I think some people are built a little differently, and I have an energy system that's been developed through a long period of agreement to this. But I don't fear the way that I used to. I used to be terribly, terribly fearful. I worry still. You know, I'm a worrier. I taught myself to worry when I was 7 because I wanted lines in my forehead like my father had.
At 20.
No, that was when I was 7. I wanted lines in my forehead, and I was worrying ever since. But I have a life right now that I didn't know I could have, and I would not have known to ask for.
Same here.
I wouldn't have known it was even on the menu of what I could allow.
Right.
I was a college teacher for 25 years, and I was doing this work quietly. And it wasn't until the first book was published and I realized my name was going to go on the cover that I had to kind of come out and sort of say, well, this is what I'm doing. So the process of being in this work itself has been an education. And that's, the energy field that I work with, is able to serve as a conductor to other people. So the groups that I do and the workshops that I do are actually, I think, less about the information that the guides are dictating than the energy that accompanies them, which is really palpable and usually kind of enormous. And that's exciting for me to be part of that.
Do you think that your role in this life as a soul plan was not only to do this work, it's an obvious thing to do this work, but it is to help you evolve in a way spiritually as a soul that not everyone is doing, obviously, but I'm just wondering how the structure is on your evolution, because you are such a reluctant channel or reluctant to this work when you first started. And I love your practical outlook on how you do your work. It's like the work is the work, the work is the work, and this is what I do. And sorry, if you don't like it, move on, kind of thing. What do you think that is as far as your evolution? Because having this kind of energy flowing through you in a lifetime for years has an effect, not only on the body, but on the soul. This frequency has to be, you can't be at a low frequency and do the work that you're doing.
I think the guides that I work with can override me, and they often do.
Okay.
I mean, I've had rotten days, and I've had to show up and channel.
Okay.
And the channeling is great. They're fine, and the moment the channeling is over, I feel better than I felt before I went in. But it's not about, for me, maintaining an ideal of who I'm supposed to be. I have to show up for this regardless. I channeled, I think the day my mother passed, I channeled, after, and they're fine. They come through. So I don't know what the question was, really.
I think that just someone who goes through life doing the work that you're doing, it's going to eventually
it affects everything.
I think it will affect everything. But the thing is, when I say that you can't do it as a low frequency, I think at this point they can override you. But generally, if you try to override the nervous system of someone who's not ready, it'll blow a circuit.
Yeah. I don't know how it works at that level. I was highly sensitive as a kid. I did everything that I could do to suppress that sensitivity, whether it was, I was a 4-pack-a-day smoker. I was a boozer. I did everything that one can do. A couple of years ago, I was 300 and something pounds to really sort of keep myself protected in some ways from the sensitivity. And it's been a process for me to allow that and to become friends with that and to see it as an ally. The work that I do, both as a channel and a psychic, really does involve my stepping into people and feeling what they're feeling and then hearing them, not only the guides. I'm a radio station for the guides, they're what I play, but when I work with other people, I'm tuning into them at other levels as well. And so the sensitivity is useful. And my energy field, I suspect, has been developed in order to do this. Did I come for this work? Probably. I had, because I've been writing about my life lately and trying to understand some of it and really trying to understand some of this passage because I was not, I was raised pretty much an atheist. And but I had a visitation when I was about 5 years old. I had an out-of-body experience that I never forgot with a being that was hovering over my bed that I pretty much at this point think was the primary guide that I work with. And I think, and it was funny because I was watching this being next to me,
right.
And at the same time, I was then up on the ceiling watching my body in the bed, having the conversation,
right.
And and my childhood wasn't fun. It wasn't easy, and in some ways, I think I was given a little maybe push, saying, stick with this, whatever it is. But the idea of God or whatever that might be, I suspect it was a longing that I had in my life, but I was somebody who grew up in a household where you weren't sort of supposed to have that. We didn't believe in those things.
Right.
And then once it was there, it was there. And once it showed up, it kind of didn't go away, although my relationship to it has changed.
Now, one thing I wanted to talk to you about today, and maybe we can bring the guides in if they so feel like coming in today, is this kind of spiritual battle that's going on right now for humanity's frequency, for lack of a better word, but to more dramatic, their soul, humanity's soul. There seems to be dark energies that are trying to hold on to what was and what they're comfortable, and there's another lighter energy that's trying to push us to the next shift. What do the guides have to say about this kind of spiritual battle for humanity?
Well, they don't.
They don't talk about it at all.
They don't talk about a battle.
Okay.
And I think, because when we do that, we move back into this idea of separation and division, which is not what they talk about at all.
Okay.
I do think that there's a massive change occurring, and the resistance to the change is what you're really speaking to.
Correct.
And that's real. But the personality structure, the guides say, who we think we are, and this is individually and collectively, knows itself entirely through a lens of separation, which is how we've experienced everything. The guides I work with say, your idea of history and your idea of who you are is based on a false concept that you're separate from source.
Right.
And so that's how we've operated. And the personality self knows itself entirely through historical data. What was, what's been. So they say we've been at war for so long that we cannot imagine a world without one. And I think that the danger perhaps is overlaying that on spirit as well and looking for the fight. I don't know that it's a fight. I think as much as anything else it's a choice. What I hear is everything is changing. And everything that's had its basis in fear, which is separation, you can call it whatever you want, that's going to have to be addressed. So the paradigm of war, they just lectured on war for a full day yesterday.
Okay.
In this class that I was in, and about our reliance on separation and our need to be right and our need to justify. But to go back to what you were saying, when the very first book was dictated, which was I Am the Word, the very first book signing I did, which was in the old Bodhi Tree bookstore in L.A., and there were like 5 people there. Nobody knew who I was, and I'd never done a book signing. And I read a little from the book, and this woman in the first row, one of the 5, raised her hand and said, "Oh, this sounds like what the Galactic Federation of so-and-so are saying, and what do your guides say about those evil aliens?"
Oh, my Lord.
And what was funny, because they hadn't been, I wasn't channeling. But the guys jumped right in and they said, "Isn't it bad enough that you can't get along here? You have to vilify the rest of the universe." So we have to stop projecting a paradigm, I think, because then we end up back in this black and white, right and wrong thing, and then nobody wins. I don't think anybody wins. So if you can get to the place where you can realize the inherent divine, that which must always be there and already be there, that's when things change. So the guides say what you damn damns you back. What you put in darkness or who you put in darkness calls you to the darkness. And I think that can be true with any kind of tribalism, even with the good people and the bad people and what we want to think in those terms. So I don't think that things change that way. They guides have said, we have been at war since somebody picked up the first rock and threw it. We've been doing this, and we've been doing it for so long that we assume it's always going to be there. And in this lecture yesterday, they used this new metaphor. I'd never heard it before. They said, imagine you're in a room with a big painting hung on the wall, and it's extraordinary violence. And no matter what you're doing in the room, your experience in that room is informed by that picture. Even if you're trying to ignore it, it is there. And they say pretty much that is the world that you've been living in. Until we collectively move to a level of consciousness where war is not an option, we're going to have it. Because war finally is an idea that's been enacted. And because we've always had it, we think it's supposed to be there. And that goes back to the thing the guys said about the personality self knows itself through history. We can't imagine a world without war, really, because we think of war, we think of peace as not fighting for a little while. So fighting is still part of the equation. The picture is still hanging on the wall. So they're talking about how we are all lifting to a level of consciousness where this is changed, it's altered. When war is no longer an option, we're not going to seek to justify it or find ways to create with that or get what we want from it. They got a lot of opinions on this stuff. So when it goes to a battle between light and dark, that's not how they talk about it. They don't talk about things in absolutes that way. They talk about things as in gradation. They do talk about evil, which they talk about as being the intent to do harm, which is a very simple definition. But for the most part, our biggest problem, they say, is our denial of the inherent divine. And I'm stressing the word inherent because they say you can't make anything holy. It already is, but you can deny the divine in anything. And we do, and we have. So they've kind of said, and you can shut me up if I'm going on.
Oh, please.
They say it's kind of like we're all born into a swimming pool that somebody peed in before we got here. You know,
That's why I love the guides.
but it's like that's how we know our world. We don't know anything other than what we've had.
So is it kind of like you just said a little bit ago that you couldn't conceive of the life that you live?
Yeah.
I couldn't conceive the life that I'm living right now. Is it the case that humanity cannot conceive of a life that is without war? Not we're quiet for a while, but without war, where we're peaceful, where we cooperate, where we all connect to the divine and understand that's inherent in life. That's rudimentary.
They say, yes, that's what will be happening. I don't think that this is some, rainbows and unicorns kind of scenario. I really don't. I mean, I'll give you an odd example because I was doing a 5-day thing out on Maui recently where I live. It was a big retreat. And the guides started talking about how our idea of God is wrong-minded. And any idea of God finally is wrong-minded. It's the best that we can do, given where we come from,
Right.
But we're still informing the idea of God as a loving God, a punishing God, a God that's going to smite those people, send these ones to hell, all of those things. And so the idea was of moving to what exists beyond that idea that we've created, our idea of source or God, to what is actually already there. And they say it is. It is. It is. And they talked about how we inform everything with meaning, and everything that we see has the meaning that was primarily given to it by those who came before us. This is a good thing, this is a bad thing, this is a fine watch, that's a crappy watch. They both tell time, but we invest in the meaning. And I had an experience after that lecture where I was walking around and everything just was. And the meaning wasn't attached to it. This is a beautiful day. It was a day. It was beautiful. But everything was what it was. It just was. And here was the really trippy part for me. I got it that it was all source. It was all God, in different levels of expression. The guides have said there is one note sung in the entire universe that is in manifestation as all things. And all of these things are operating at different levels of tone or vibration in a scale. So when we talk about evil or, the dark forces or whatever that is, we're talking low vibration. And then you can go to the higher. Now, we're the ones who decide what is good and what is bad, for the most part. What's good to you and I may be bad to somebody watching this show who doesn't believe in any of this stuff.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine. It's subjective, I suppose. But when you think of reality as an octave of tone, and that's how they describe it, high notes and low notes, and they're all being played, and they're chords, and they're things, and they're things that we see. It's only one octave. They say that when you move up in vibration to what they call the next octave, they call it the upper room. That's how they describe it. Fear is not operative there at that level of tone. And so you're not spiritually bypassing and pretending something bad didn't happen or hard didn't happen, but you're beginning to have an experience of yourself without the mandate of fear to be what confirms or informs one's choices. And we're doing that all the time without even knowing it, I suspect. And then the world, I think, has changed. Mm-hmm. And so that's how they teach this. The battle stuff, the challenge with even the term spiritual warrior that people like to bandy about is that you got to be looking for the problem.
If you're enjoying this conversation, I invite you to go deeper down the rabbit hole with me on Next Level Soul TV. It's packed with exclusive content like live special guest Q&As, daily podcasts, commercial-free access to the entire Next Level Soul catalog, early access to episodes before they air, and special meditations you won't find anywhere else. We will be adding new exclusive content every month. Plus, you can connect with me during my monthly live streams. Just go to nextlevelsoul.com/subscribe and join our soulful community today. I'll see you on the inside. You can't have a warrior without a war.
That's pretty much it. And so you're going to find one. So I think that there are ways of addressing the things that are hard and challenging. And you can call them war and poverty and, and systems of control, whatever they may be. And I think that's all happening now. And it's been happening, and I think it continues to happen. When the guides dictated a book called The Book of Truth, which I think it was right before the Trump-Clinton election was this time. And they said right before in that book, and they said, okay, what's about to happen now is that everything that's been buried is going to be revealed. It's going to be a process of exhumation. I mean, this is dated, so it's right before a lot of things happened, including a lot of movements and a lot of awakening to past, traumas. Yeah. And they said, but if you imagine, and this is happening at the individual level and at the level of the collective as well, he said, if you imagine your backyard is suddenly an archaeological dig, and things are being exhumed from 5 years ago and 5,000 years ago or 50, it's going to look like a mess. And they said the purpose of this exhumation is not to blame and not to rage, it's to see, because nothing is healed or brought to the light until it is first seen. Mm-hmm. And the idea of seeing something without informing it with the edicts of a particular culture or religion or doctrine is seeing in truth. Now, the guides say we think of truth as my personal truth, her personal truth, and truth as being subjective. But they say what is true is always true. And that's what brings you back to the idea of source or the one-note song, when you can see the inherent divine in what was created in distortion or fear or anger. You can actually shift the thing to begin to operate at a higher tone.
And, when you were saying that, you were looking at a day, you were in a day, and it was a beautiful day to your point of view. But, for me, sometimes a sunny day is nice, but it could be hot. Yeah. I sometimes like overcast days where the weather is nice. But so it all depends on the point of view, people's preferences, and also their programming that they grew up with.
But this was different. You see, this wasn't about that. That's what was so different about it. It just was.
It was just a day.
No, it just...
How do you explain what?
I can say this to you. Okay, so I'm sitting here with Alex, who I like and I have history with, and I'm sitting in the studio, and I'm thinking about what we're doing, and that's one level of my being engaged. Mm-hmm. On another level, and I'm not going to say this well, they might have to come in and explain what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. We're just being here.
Oh, we're in the moment.
But we're being here without the meanings that I would attach to things, like I like your sweater, or all that stuff. It just was. And for me, the only experience that was so different was I got it in some level, what they were talking about sort of how things have been. They say we're operating in a museum. Everything that we encounter was named by those who came before us and has the meaning that the culture has given it. And so we end up without intending to replicate the old stuff, always, including how we fight and how we solve things. So you go to this other level, you see the divine self, what they call the monad or the God within. The monad does not know itself through historical data. It is not bound by time and space. So the claim that the guides work with in their teachings, behold, I make all things new, is the realization of what actually is outside of how it's been decided upon by those who came before us, or what we think it's supposed to be. It's a very different way of being in an experience.
It's very interesting the way you look at that. With the wars that are going on right now, and this old way of looking at things, I love the idea that you're saying that everything that we've touched, this is called a book.
Yeah.
Because someone called it a book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In our culture.
Yeah.
In our culture. In other cultures, it's called other things. And this is not a great example, but a lot of the things that, like what's going on in some of these wars, those are thousands, some of them are thousands of years old.
Yeah.
These arguments. Fighting over a patch of land that said, I did this or I did that and that's mine. No, that's mine. No, what really happened was here. It's our land. That's your land. All that kind of stuff. And generationally, they wake up and their kids are told, that guy's bad. We're good.
Yeah.
They did this, this, and this, but they never experienced any of it. And then it just it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because eventually you have so much hate for that person on the other side. One day they're going to do something like, that's what they were talking about. And it's just kind of this vicious circle. We're trying to pull out of it, but it seems like it's going to take a minute.
I think it's going to take a minute.
Yeah.
And the guides have said, we can learn, if we want to, the futility of war by fighting until there's nobody left standing. We can do that if we want to. They say it's not going to happen. And this is what they say that gives me hope. They say humanity has decided at a higher level, at a collective level, that we're going to move beyond this, and that we have to do this in some ways for our survival as a species. And the species, they say, is shifting. We're going into this whole other level of experience. And it sounds far out. But when and this isn't to make myself special, because I don't experience that, but things that are very ordinary to me now in terms of how I hear and feel and utilize my senses are things that I were told were impossible when I was growing up. And I'm not that special, and because we all have capacity for this. And I think part of what allows for this is our willingness to trust. And ideally, I suppose, trust in something greater, something higher, something beyond the personality that wants to get its way no matter what. One of the first things that I heard in channeling, and I always have to say I'm 99% sure that I heard it in channeling because I wrote it down on a piece of paper because I didn't understand it. And I was having a hard time when I heard it. And I heard freedom will come, or freedom comes, when the throne relinquishes its king. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? And now I totally get what it means. Who's running the show?
Right.
What aspect of self? Is it the self that knows, truly knows, and they say knows means realizes, that everybody is of source? Or is it the one that says off with their heads? Or I have to get my way at the cost of it, that there's not enough and I better grab it? Borders are ideas.
Right.
That's what they're just ideas that have been concretized in form.
Yeah, when you look out of space, from outer space, you look at
they're not there.
There's no big lines.
Nope.
It's all just. Yeah.
And a country is an idea, and all of everything that guides say, everything was first idea. And when you go back to the first idea and you go to source, or what allows for that idea to be enacted or made into form, then you go back to the source of all things. And that's when things change. That's really the alchemy that occurs, not by trying to fix or stamp out or eradicate or justify or fight or blame. It's actually coming from a different level of consciousness, which is how the guides say, that's how a world is made new. That's their teaching.
One thing I find fascinating about, I have the opportunity to speak to people like you, and probably more so than most people have access to people who are on their spiritual path or have abilities like psychics or channels and things like that. This concept of the spiritual ego is really interesting, especially in the work that you do, and even in the work that I'm doing, where someone like yourself who has a channel, who channels profound wisdom through these guides, could very easily become egotistical about it's me. That's one level. That's the really out front level, easy, low hanging fruit level. Now the deeper, more dangerous level is when someone is going through awakenings or are starting to get certain abilities, start to see things a little differently, maybe through meditation, maybe through gifts that have been something like that, they'll start throwing spiritual terms on things that shouldn't have spiritual terms. Kind of like, oh, that leaf fell. It's a sign.
Yeah.
And you start to build your own storyline.
Yeah.
And the ego, because the ego is very tricky that way. The ego will come in and go, oh, so we're spirit. Okay, well, we're going to be the most spiritual then. If we're going to go down this road, is that the mask we're wearing? Okay, we got to take it up. And I'm sure you've run into a few of them.
A lot of it. I mean, and I run into it all the time. I live on Maui where everybody's a shaman. You know?
Obviously.
I mean, it's part of the culture. It's funny, when you were saying this, I remembered, I'm an old 12-stepper. I got sober when I was 25, so it's 37 years now. But I remember at the beginning the magical thinking, because for me, oh my God, there is a God, and oh my God, what does that mean? And I remember hearing people say, I was driving here and every light turned green, and that means I was supposed to be here. And I think, well, maybe you just hit the lights at the right time. But I understood the need to sort of justify and verify that experience. And I actually think it's a stage of development. I think it's something that people pass through. And the good news is at least they're onto something. I mean, if you think that your spirituality is your crystal collection, eventually you'll hopefully realize that that's not the case, that those are tools that people can use, but it's what they are. People, I think, can easily get caught up in the fashion or the jargon of spirituality.
Or the mask, the costume.
The mask and the costume, that's big stuff. And I'm a bit of a curmudgeon around this, I'm afraid. And well, it's true though, but not, and some of it comes from a place of compassion and having lived through it. When I was waking up to this, everything was exotic and sexy and oh my God, and the paranoia, oh my God, I wanted it all, and I wanted it all badly, and I wanted it all sincerely.
Right.
Now, I came into this stuff at a period of crisis. I had been raised an atheist, and I was in this hotel room in St. Paul, and I didn't know where to get drugs in St. Paul, and there was a giant gopher on a spit outside my window in the Gopher Campus Motor Lodge, and it was awful, awful, awful.
It's very surreal.
It was crazy, and the Gideons leave these books in the drawer, and I took it out. It said, Prayer for People in Crisis. I actually got on my knees, because I thought that's how you were supposed to do it, and I said it, and I meant it, and then 3 days later, I heard a voice. When I asked, what can I do for myself today that's positive? And I heard a voice, and it told me what to do. And I went.
And I'm sure you were like, this is completely normal. I'm completely fine with this.
No, it wasn't a voice in the room.
No, but in your head.
It was a voice. The thing about the voice, which is still true when I channel, and I don't know if these were the same guides or some aspect of me that knew, but there was no way to doubt the truth of what I heard. And the guides say, the difference between thinking and knowing is that there's never a question. In knowing, in divine knowing or true knowing, which is really clear cognizance, there's never a question. And when you have those moments of true knowing, pretty much you're being asked to act upon that thought. So how did I go there? I mean, that was how I started. I know, because for me, at that time, it wasn't fashionable. I mean, it was the old New Age, Shirley MacLaine New Age, 1987. She was on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah, no one's talking channeling back in '87. Not really.
Well, there was Seth books. I had read half a Seth book when I was a graduate student. I was at Yale. I used to get drunk and read half a Seth book, and that was it. But and I thought it was fascinating, but I think it really did affect me. But I didn't spend a lot of time dwelling on it, and I wasn't hunting things out. For me, and for many, many people, when this becomes inevitable is when you go or when you answer a call. And the good news is, I think, the people being born now are being born now with more innate awareness and, more, and it gives me great hope. And I because I taught college for so many years, I watched generationally how the kids showed up. And right before I stopped teaching at NYU, which was maybe 9 years ago or something, some kid on the stage in a class that I was teaching dropped his folder of papers. 100 pages fell all over the stage. And all the kids in the front row, without saying a word, got up and picked the papers up and handed him back. And I was like, what?
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. That's in an 80s movie. They would have just been like,
exactly.
nerd, all that kind of stuff.
Pretty much. But it was a whole different consciousness. And nobody talked to each other. They just showed up and did the right thing. And I was very moved, and it gave me great hope, and I actually still have it. So, I don't think it has to be that hard, but I think all the mask stuff fades away in time if you stick with it. Or if you just want to stay in the costume is going to kill you in time.
There's no doubt about it. Even when I was going through my journey in spirituality, way years before I even started this conversation, there would be those moments where you're like, oh, I know this information, so I must be better than you. Those kind of things. It's like, I've read this book, so, oh, you haven't? Oh, you poor soul. Yeah. These kind of things. And it's just such a trap. But you're right. It will crush you eventually.
Well, or you'll move through it.
Or if you don't move through it, it will crush you.
I didn't know Ram Dass. His community on Maui are my friends.
Sure.
And I spent time with them. And I had one kid who used to plug in a Ram Dass lecture every time I got into the car with him because he wanted me to know the teachings. But there was this one lecture that I did hear that I loved all of it, actually. I thought, oh, God, this is like what the guys are saying. It's just funnier and it's easier to understand.
He was funny. Yeah.
But it was this teaching about how, when everybody first would get spiritual, I guess he probably delivered this in the 70s or something, and everybody's wearing white and namaste this, namaste that. And then he said, you run into that person 2 years later in a bar, and they're saying, what was all that crap about? What was I thinking? And what Ram Dass said was that person's still on the path. Mm-hmm. It just looks different. Like once you're on it, you're not off it. Mm-hmm. And I got to say that's been true for me, and I think true for many people. But it doesn't have to look a certain way. That's the ego too.
Well, when I think channeler, this outfit obviously is high spiritual channelers. This is the outfit I think. No, you walk around looking normal, completely.
Well, I'm not saying that I'm normal, but I'm as normal as one can get, I suppose, doing what I do.
Right, but you're not wearing white and I don't chanting and things like that.
I go to kirtan and chant with my friends, but mostly because they're my friends.
Right, but not walking around day to day.
No, I could care less.
Right.
But it doesn't get me anything. And all if it gets you anything, it probably gets you trouble. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine. I don't know. I mean, I'm not one of those people who has a photographer following around for Instagram. I just feel
oh my God, I would love to see your Instagram.
I have one. It's
I know you,
fine.
But I would like to see you so this is what I'm eating today. Look at this.
This is me holding up a crystal to the light.
The light should.
Yeah.
Do you see the beams?
But
that's the guides.
Yeah. But maybe that's a place people have to go to. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that passes for channeling that I don't think is channeling, or that people would like to call channeling, which I think is mostly ego, and some of it is very well intentioned and some of it is just somebody trying to do a cool thing. But, but even that, it's not for me to judge about this stuff.
It's their path.
Yeah, it is their path.
It's their path. And speaking of people's paths, I ran into someone the other day that was pretty remarkable. I ran into somebody who was so locked into the story that they were telling themselves. Mm-hmm. We all tell ourselves stories. Yeah. We all have our journey that we're walking in. But her story was so concrete. And anything I said that was even remotely contrary to what she said or thought or believed, she blocked out 110%.
Really?
It was pretty, I hadn't run into someone like that in a long time. Mm-hmm. And this kind of this wall of I absolutely disagree with you. I think you're going to go to hell for this kind of stuff in a very pleasant way.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a aggressive thing. It was just very, and I was just like, wow. Because I'm saying, there are many paths to God, and there's many journeys to go there. And, and if, just because you're born into one quote unquote philosophy or religion or thoughts, but you can't dismiss, 4 or 5 billion other people that don't believe that.
Yeah.
And that's where no, and it's that older idea of nope, this is the way. Nothing else is going to happen. And it's not just one sect.
Yeah.
All of them do it.
Yeah, I agree.
From the most peace-loving Buddhist to everybody else. They all have it in one way, shape, or form anyways. But I found it really fascinating to meet someone like that. I haven't talked to someone like that. When you run into them, into people like this, not in an aggressive manner, not people who are yelling, because obviously you're a devil and the demons are coming through you. But when you get past that, how do you deal with that? Or is there anything that you can say or the guides have to say to help that person, ease that person, or even just deal with that person in your day-to-day? Because you're not going to change them.
No.
So what would you say?
What would I say? Yeah. I mean, mostly I don't have those encounters often anymore. I used to have, when I was new to doing this work publicly and people would see me, I had many people who would come and, sit there with their arms folded and go like, yeah, right. And it usually wasn't until the energy would come in and they could feel it. And then they would get startled because they could feel it, something was happening. Okay. Or the psychic stuff where I was able to, because when I step into other people, I often start to look like them and, I take on the mannerisms and stuff. And that was shocking because, how would I know how their mother drinks their coffee or things like that? And they would come around some. But people who've decided this can't be good or can't be true have decided, and that's their experience. And it's not my place to try to change them. I don't really care anymore.
You used to.
I cared. I was a chubby, bullied kid. I cared about what people thought. And there's another psychic said to me once, which was interesting. She said, Paul, you've had enough public humiliation in your life that's actually allowing you to do this work now. Because kind of like, what else is there to do? And I don't want to invite that because there's always something else. But, I don't care the way that I did because I don't care if people believe in this or not or think this is real or not. It's not my problem. I just show up for what's in front of me and do the best I can. I asked, do I go to the guys with it? They just said not wise, so they're not going to take this one on.
I just heard it, yeah. I'm not sure if it's the guides or if it's you that discuss humanity's reckoning.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain what that term means and what they mean?
Yeah. It was in the very first book, and they still talk about it, with frequency. And I'm the word they said, and this was again 2009. It was dictated, published in 2010. They said humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. And they said everything that's been created in fear is going to need to be recreated in a higher way, which is really what they're teaching now, how that's done, how a world is altered through consciousness.
So the world, the systems that we see crashing out around us, ever since that Trump Clinton, I mean, I would agree with you. I think there was signs of it earlier. Yeah. But that's when, all hell kind of broke loose and all these things started to bubble up that I kind of never even thought about anymore. Like, oh, that's in the past. And it started to come up. We've started to see the crumbling of institutions around the world, from religious to political to monetary to medical, all of it starting to crumble. Yeah. Is that what is happening to these older systems, that they have to kind of either crumble in the way they used to be and get either or change or completely just move off out of the way, crumble to the ground, and so something new can come up with this new idea of, like, perfect example, those kids who are picking up those papers?
I mean, I suspect both are true. If the foundation of a building is good, like, there's nothing wrong with the idea of a bank. The guide said the first bank happened when some hunter gave his purse to somebody to hold while he went off into the woods to hunt. I mean, that was the bank, Nothing wrong with the idea of it. It's what's happened with it since. Nothing wrong with, I guess, the idea of leadership or government or whatever you want. Nothing wrong with it in its inherent truth. It's what we've done with it. So I think if the foundation is okay, it probably something can be worked with. But if the foundation is corrupt, probably it doesn't stick around, and they've been talking about this for a long, long time. And what's interesting about their teachings there's no fear-mongering in their teachings, but they're pretty blunt. at times, which is, but they say, these are your creations. People in New Age or spiritual culture tend to think of manifestation as getting what they want. How do I get what I want? How can I use this to get what I want? And I understand that. But the guides say, everything we see and are in any kind of an encounter with, we're in vibrational accord to, which means we're contributing to it. How you think about something contributes to the thing itself and informs the thing itself. We prefer to think of ourselves as victims to what we encounter, but in fact, that's not the case. So to move to a level of accountability to those things, how we perceive the government or the bank or all those things, that's what can allow change in other kinds of ways.
Do you or the guides, if you can explain this to me, and this is my belief, and I'd love to hear what they think, is that humanity's evolution spiritually, consciously, frequency, if you will, has, our frequency is today's humanity is very different than it was 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And with that level of frequency, that knowledge is opened up. Ideas that we're ready for open up when these frequencies get to a certain place. Why Genghis Khan didn't have the nuclear bomb. If not, we would have destroyed ourselves comfortably at that stage in our evolution. Is that, first of all, do you agree with that idea?
I haven't thought about it accurate. They're saying accurate.
Okay.
The way you said, not quite the way you said it, but it's accurate. But it is accurate. Things exist at different levels of tone. Things exist at different levels of tone. Ideas are often accessed. Ideas are often accessed from the higher field by those who can attend to them, by those who can attend to them. They're often brought forth. They're often brought forth, often ignored, often disputed or refuted, often disputed or refuted until humanity catches up to it, until humanity catches up to it. You have the ability to do so many things. You have the ability to do anything, to do many things before you have the ability to make them so, to make them so. You could always do things. You could always do things that you rely on science for now, that you rely on science for now. And you've created science, and you've created a science that supports your imagination, that supports your imagination. What you've never done is look at the physical body, and the energetic bodies, and the energetic bodies, we're actually able to see what you're actually capable of. And that is what is coming now. And that is the work that is coming now. These achievements, which will inform medicine, and commerce are already present in the higher field. Once some of you begin to access them, they make themselves available to all. They see the common field. Now the common field is reality. Now the common field is the reality the upper room which we teach. The upper room which we teach is where you align to, where such things are available, and paramount to new creations, We're not sipping the old wine. When you are not sipping from the old wine, you will discover that the old wine tasted bitter, When you go to the higher, what seemed obvious in the small self, no longer seems obvious. Something new appears, and something new then appears. Period. They're saying period.
So then a lot of these avatars that come down, or I could say down for lack of a better word, but that incarnate on earth, that came with these teachings, Buddha, Jesus, many powerful yogis over the years who've come up with these teachings. Seems to be a pattern that the teachings are not accepted right away other than a few. And then it takes years and years and years before some of these radical ideas, when Jesus was walking, the stuff that he was talking about were extremely radical. So much so that apparently he got killed and crucified for it. But is that kind of what happens with all new ideas and the big monster ideas?
Generally, they come to several people at once, or several ideas, are seated around the world, and are understood through different language, or different systems are built up, around them. That's why you have many religions. That's why you have many religions. The truth of each religion is actually implicit within the structure, and is within the structure that was built around it. It was built around to be focused on structure, but you focus on the structure, not the original idea. There's usually not one one human being. There is usually not one human being to carry the message. To carry the message, it's actually seated on the plane. It's actually seated on the plane, and those who can claim it, and those who can claim it and nurture it will sing it, will sing it. It will become their song. It will become their song. And as their song is sung by others, and as their song is sung by others, the world has changed. The world is changed through the presence of the song, through the presence of the song, less so the individual, the prophet or Messiah, the prophet or Messiah, but the song that was sung through them, but the song that was sung through them, period.
And it's so true that there's, if you start looking at the world religions, the great prophets, many of them are just saying the same thing in different flavorings.
Yeah.
Jesus and Buddha were talking about a lot of the similar ideas, but it needed to come into the East. Then there's Hinduism, and then there's Europe, and then they all had to come in a certain in different packaging, if you will. And these entities decided to come back to help us, essentially.
Yes, no. They're saying yes and no, not so to help, but to offer what is already yours, what is already yours. You have to say yes to what is already yours. You have to say yes to what is already yours. You're not being bequeathed a gift. You're not being bequeathed a gift or being shown what's already there. You are being shown what was already there that you chose to ignore or were fearful of, period.
So in other words, that they are here to show us as an example of what is capable of being done with us in many ways.
We're here to teach you who you are, and indeed have always been, and indeed have always been, period.
Got it. And that's the thing that I always try to talk about, because people, again, see what you're doing, and they go, oh, you have to be born special. But we're all capable of this kind of work. If this is I'm using you as an example, but we're all, Jesus said it. Everything I could do, you could do.
That's exactly what he said. Yeah. And I think that's a truth in the teaching that gets buried muddled a lot. So we all have capacity. The God within me, whatever you want to call that, the guides I work with call it the monad. Sometimes they'll call it the Christ within, or the divine self, or the true self. There's lots of different names. They don't care which one we use. Is actually the same as it is within you and within everybody. The idea of soul as being particular and having a fingerprint, I understand. But the inherent divine is of source. And the guides say the God within you and me and everybody else is always there. Right. But we've denied it. And it also knows itself as of the other. So the God within me knows itself as not separate from the God within you and the God within all things. And that's where it gets really kind of trippy and mind-blowing if you think about it.
So it's interesting. So essentially that you and I can walk. We're walking.
Yeah.
At a rudimentary level, we can walk, we can talk, we do things. But when we're born, we don't know that we can walk until we see other people do it. And then we start to try to figure it out.
Absolutely right.
Or figure it out ourselves. This is a very base, materialistic, grounded view of what we're trying to explain. So in similar, when you see someone like an avatar, like a Jesus or a Buddha, talking about this, no, you can connect directly to source. All the answers are within you. It's essentially trying to convince people that no, this is great. This is a guide, not this book, but all books, all knowledge, all teachings. But the true answers are within you if you're able to go inward to connect to the divine. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but it's so frustrating because people go, well, how? And I try, and I don't get it, and I don't know how, and I've been there. Okay. I totally get that. And when you hear, well, Jesus said do this or Buddha said do this, I mean, you see them as instructions, but you can. People who really get it, I expect, see them as examples. But Jesus was teaching socialism, really. I mean, feed the poor. I'm welcome your neighbor in. I mean, all that stuff is real, grounded truth. There's nothing woo-woo about it. It's really simple. So, what was I going to say? What did you just say?
We were talking about the example of everything that we can do, and you were trying to convince people that the truth is within them.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't try to convince people of anything, but this is what happened for me, and this may be useful. So when I was waking up into this stuff, I ended up studying energy healing with this woman, Ethel Lombardi, who was one of the first, I think, 13 Reiki masters in the U.S. This was back in the day when people had to put down a dowry to study. This is not popular at the. This was a big deal. She was a student of a woman named Takata, who was the protege of Usai, who brought through what we know of as Reiki. So Ethel was a big deal, but she'd already broken from that, and she was teaching her own stuff. And she was this. I thought she was old. She was probably my age, but, with bright red hair and blue eyes. And she was like an old Irish lady, or Scottish, I think she was. But I watched this ordinary lady stand in a room, and she said, okay, everybody, ask for one thing, you're going to get it. And I felt the energy come into the room, and I was electrified by it. And my jaw dropped. And I went, when what she did in that moment was astonishing, was she gave me permission. She showed me something was possible that defied everything I had known. And here's the funny thing. When the guides work through me, they do that in their way. Now, they bring through the energy, they fill the room, and people can have their own experience. Now, until we know that something is possible, we're not going to claim it. That's the first step in any kind of manifestation. And I think the fact that I come from, in some ways, a little bit of a traditional background, I was an academic, I did all that stuff. I'm not wearing a turban, with a sapphire on the front. I'm not doing that. If this can happen through me, it can happen. Now, if I was 6'5", I might be playing professional basketball because I'd be built for that. And while I was built for this, I understand that I had to be developed, and I think anybody can be developed.
Yes.
You have to say, I'm willing, and then you have to be willing to go through a process that can feel at times, at least for me, like going through a meat grinder, because it's not all easy and polite. Like any adventure, there's cliffs that you have to hang from and walk, and that's how it goes.
And I think that when you're going through an awakening, or you're trying to connect to source, or everything that we're talking about, you get frustrated because you say it, but it's hard to explain it.
Yeah,
it's something that really is personal in the sense of how it happens for you.
Yep.
Not everyone's gonna go, okay, step 1 you do this, step 2 you do this, step 3 you do this. Your chakras open, the heart chakra opens, and now you're enlightened. And it doesn't happen for everybody that way. There are guides, there are areas you can point to. Yeah. You can start testing things out, but it really is unique to you. It's as unique as a fingerprint, honestly.
I agree with that completely. I don't think it's one size fits all. I think everybody has their own journey and their own experience, and I think we come with our own lessons to learn around these things. I don't know if everybody wakes up in a lifetime, and I don't think they need to.
Correct.
I think we come to learn different things at different times.
Correct.
So I think that's really important for people to know. My journey, when I did a little meditation group, I went to somebody else's channeling, before I was back when I was opening up.
Sure.
And this woman did this lovely meditation, and she said, just imagine, everybody see your paths before you, your spiritual paths, and then we had to go around the room and share. Mm-hmm. And some people were saying, well, the roses are blooming as I walk by, and the sparrows
unicorns are around.
And I came to me, and this is what I said what I saw. I said, I was climbing up the mountain like the witch's castle in The Wizard of Oz. It was like peaked and dark and stormy, climbing, but bloody feet, bloody fingers, But I had an investment in it being hard.
Why?
I had an investment in being because I...
Academic, maybe?
No, it wasn't academic. Well, honestly, it was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard. When I was coming into my stuff, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York. Everybody I knew was dying all around me.
Yeah.
I was basically homeless.
Yeah.
I had nothing. I was out of graduate school. I was nearly sober. I'd only worked in bars. I was a writer that couldn't write. It was and I was so well taken care of through those years. But it was hard. I remember going to somebody's meditation in the Ritzy building at that time, and you had to take your shoes off, and I had holes in my socks, and I was covering my feet. And people were talking about service. That was the subject of the meeting. And somebody said, I smiled at the checkout person today, and I tipped the cleaning lady more. And at the time, I'm like, what are they talking about? I was like, do I have enough money to get home from this thing at that time?
Right. That's such an important thing, because a lot of people, we're talking about deep thoughts and self, looking inward. I'm like, but if you can't pay the rent or put food on the table, it's really difficult for you to focus on the spiritual path.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I learned about prosperity consciousness at the time that I had to, because I didn't have anything. I learned a lot of this stuff. I don't want to live through that again if I can help it. It was very hard. And in retrospect, I look back at that time in my life, and I really was a step away from being on the street. I mean, I remember needing to move once because I was sharing a place with somebody who was still drinking, and I had stopped. And they said, well, how much money do you have for the move? And I said, 45. She said, $4,500? I said, I had $45. That's what I had to my name.
Wow.
And that's pretty close to the edge.
It's
homelessness pretty much. But I was living with somebody else. I had a roof over. But I always had food and a roof over my head. But I learned lessons through this.
Yeah.
And it taught me a great deal of compassion. And now, and I understand there's nothing wrong with prosperity. I think it's terrific. I think we have to understand, though, what source is. But people sometimes book readings with me, and they say, well, I can't pay my rent this month, and I know God is going to provide. And I'm saying, well, I'm not cheap, and you should probably use this money towards the rent, and I would prefer that you do that. Be practical with your life. It's not all magical. It's not. When I say I was taken care of, I actually had nothing else to do but to trust Source that everything was going to be okay.
Because you were in a corner. You got basically put in a corner.
I really was in a corner. And but when I look back at that time, I see how much grace there was. I had people who loved me. I was really damaged, and I was really frightened, and I didn't think things were going to get better. I had an old shrink. I call her Hurricane Harriet. But we all called her Hurricane Harriet Warfield. She was a trip. She was like an ex-Corrine. She looked like an ex-Corrine, like a leggy blonde, with like the 120 cigarette, and she used to smoke like that, And she said to me, "Get spiritual. Get spiritual." She said, the people that make it get spiritual. And she also said, and don't listen to those people walking around saying they got the higher power. The ones that got the higher power probably ain't talking about it.
Absolutely right.
And I thought, I do think she was right. She was a gift.
I mean, I'll tell you what. I mean, people who talk about how wealthy they are, they probably aren't that wealthy. It's always like they say, don't look at the guy who's yelling and screaming and trying to be boisterous in the bar. It's the quiet one in the corner you got to worry about.
It's pretty true.
Throughout our lives, it's like, it's not the loudmouth. The loudmouth probably can't fight. But that quiet guy smoking a cigarette in the corner and drinking a beer, stay away from him. And I would agree with that in the spiritual sense as well. I
do too.
And I had the pleasure of meeting so many beautifully spiritual human beings who are on their path, and there's no question that they are at a different frequency than I am or that I've been around. And I'm blessed by just being, even with you, just being in the room with someone like yourself. It feeds the frequency. But generally speaking, they don't come in walking like, I know that I am the way, I am the spirit. None of them do that. They just come in and like, this is what I figured out. Maybe this could be helpful in your path.
Pretty much.
Maybe if it doesn't, it's okay.
Yeah.
We're all just walking the path.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, and I think we talked about this at another time, but the power of on our spiritual path, the power of forgiveness, and what that lack of forgiveness does to us, that anchor that it holds us back. Can you talk about it, or the guides talk a little bit about that?
I'll talk about it first, and if they want to add to it, because this is stuff that I do understand because they've taught it. In the Book of Mastery, there's a little section where they say, so you're walking up this mountain, that mountain that I saw, I guess. But, walking up the mountain, and there's a cave, and you go into the cave, and the one person you never want to see again as long as you live is in that cave. And your job is to escort them out of the cave. And they said, well, you're the one that put them in darkness, and, they've called you there. You put them there, and they've called you there, and your job is now to let them out. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to have dinner with them, that you have to, make it all okay, but it does mean that I have been put in darkness by who I have placed there. That's vibrational accord. It's a very simple teaching. And forgiveness, I think, is the release of that. And the forgiveness is done for you, for me, not for the other person. They're bound too, I suspect, energetically. But it works. It's huge. It's a huge, huge thing. And I understand that there are people that say, I can never forgive this. And there are people who've done things in my life that I have a very hard time forgiving. Well, the best I can do sometimes is say, well, they have a right to be in the world as they are, and unattach. But I think the idea of forgiveness is extraordinarily practical, and it's not, as some people would like to say, about becoming docile and letting yourself get stepped on. I don't think that's it at all. It's about not binding you to the event, to the person, to the situation that you end up reinforcing through the block. Because it does block the heart. It does block love, no question.
How do you balance that in the real world, in material, like you were saying? Because if someone wrongs me, and I go, it's all good.
That's not it.
Yeah, please explain it. So I want clarity if you can.
Let me see if they can do it. The idea of forgiveness is misunderstood by forgiving or releasing yourself. By forgiving, you're releasing yourself from bondage, from a bondage you have placed or tied yourself to, to realize the self. To realize the self as free from another is to indeed to allow them to be, is indeed to allow them to be. Now, your question is very simple. How is this done? How is this done? And what is the affect? And what is the affect? It takes people to have a war. It takes two people to have a war. It takes one person to walk away from battle. It takes one person to walk away from a battle. It takes one person to forgive a wrong. It takes one person to forgive a wrong. Now, accountability is still required. You understand the idea of karma. You understand the idea of karma as punishment. It is not punishment. It is not punishment. It is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to learn. The lessons will come again and again until you learn them. The lessons will come again and again until you learn them. To realize another is of God. To realize another is of God, regardless of what they've done, regardless of what they have done, is also to forgive yourself, is also to forgive yourself for not being who you thought you were supposed to be, for not being who you were supposed to be. The idea of Christ, or the inner light as Redeemer is actually accurate, The realization of the inherent divine, the realization of the inherent divine, in another where it has been denied, will not only redeem them, it will release the cord between you. It will release the cord between you that was forged in anger or fear, You may have any kind of boundary you wish. You may have any kind of boundary you wish. You should not allow somebody to hit you in the head. You should not allow someone to hit you in the head. You should take the stick from their hand and say no. This is not about being a victim. This is not about being a victim, but as we say, you cannot be a victim. You cannot be a victim and a master at the same time, period.
Much more clear on that.
Okay, good.
That's very clear. One thing that I'd love to ask you about is, how can we determine between thoughts and guidance?
Guidance? Well, the guides teach knowing, true knowing. And there's nothing wrong with thinking. We're thinking, all the time. I had to think about, what I wasn't aware today and, what time I had to get up. When one has true knowing, there's never a question. Now,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but the concept of knowing.
Yeah.
I understand and agree with what you're saying, but for someone who has told themselves a story, and their egoic mind this is the knowing. I know this is true. How can you tell the difference?
Well, how can they know the difference?
Or how can you know the difference within your own life? Because there might be beliefs.
Oh, yeah, there are beliefs.
And it's knowing of those beliefs. Like you and I both have our beliefs on
Yeah.
how the universe works.
Yep.
Period.
But I don't say I know and it's a fact.
No, I say I have a belief.
Exactly
I
right.
literally say I have a belief.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, and that picture is changing
Yeah.
with every conversation I have.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of what I do.
Yeah.
But I'm always trying to figure it out. But I have a belief of this was going, and it will adjust accordingly. But I think there's some core elements that, reincarnation is, souls, all these kind of core ideas, I believe that are a knowing.
Yep.
But how do I know? It's me knowing them or me knowing them in the head.
I don't know that I fully understand. I'm going to try.
Okay.
So when the guides say what is true is always true, they're not talking about subjective reality.
Okay.
So subjective reality is what I believe and what I think. So I can say I am a man of a certain age, I look a certain way, I live in a certain place, and those things would all be true today. Tomorrow I may be living someplace else. I may not look like I do today, tomorrow. All of those things may be true. So what is always true goes back to what is always present, which is the source of all things. And then it's irrefutable. So your question is really about how do we know the difference between what is true and what we believe to be true, I think.
Correct.
Let me see if they can go here. We would like to try. We would like to try. It's a good question in some ways. It's a good question in some ways. He's seeking to understand himself. He's seeking to understand himself and how he thinks and how he thinks. 80% of what you think. 80% of what you think is somebody else's idea, is somebody else's idea that you have inherited and believe to be so, and believe to be so. Now it is true you're sitting in a chair. Now it is true you are sitting in a chair, what you are sitting in, but what you are sitting in was once somebody else's idea of a chair, was once somebody else's idea of a chair, and that became the common field, and that became the common field. You all know what chairs are and what they do. You all know what chairs are and what they do. To realize yourself in a new way is to move to a new mind, is to move to a new mind, or a mind that is in alignment, or a mind that is in alignment with your essence, or true nature, that has not been preconditioned, by the artifacts of history, the ideology of the past, and the mores of religion, or ethics that you understand yourself through, This is not to displace those things. It's to understand the difference. It's to understand the difference. I am feeling this way. I am feeling this way because this is what people are supposed to feel, is how the common field operates, When you begin to understand yourself, in a higher way, the idea of self becomes other. I'm not who I thought I was. I am not who I thought I was. And there is confusion. But then who am I? As you understand yourself, or comprehend the higher, it becomes far easier. Not relying on the religion. You are not relying upon the old information to decide what is so, when you begin to trust thought, and you begin to trust thought as essence. In other words, a true thought. A true thought will have its own resonance, You understand it very differently, and you will understand it very differently from what you thought you were supposed to think or believe yourself to be, or what you believe yourself to be. He was once 5 years old. That is always true. That is always true. He was once 5 years old. He was once 5 years old. He was once never born. He was once never born. That is always true. His idea of who he should be, was informed by others. That is always true. That is not who he ever was. That is always true as well. Discernment plays out at this level. You understand the difference. You understand the difference between an old pretext, an old conditioned idea, and what is always true for you, and indeed for all, period. That makes sense?
Beautifully.
Okay, good.
Beautifully. Have you, and you mentioned you had an experience, kind of a spiritual experience, it was out of body experience, or you saw the guides like that. Have you ever had an experience, and I'm asking because I have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts or the guides, where you're in a scene, you see what's going on, and yet no one's speaking, and yet you know instinctually who they are, and then you have a feeling that communicates 1 billion words to you in a way that language couldn't. Have you had something like that?
At times, mostly in meeting someone who I knew that I knew, and I was already overloaded with information.
Oh, that just
upon
comes
the meeting.
Flooding.
Well, it wasn't even a flooding. It was an innate knowing, and it came with, how can I say it, a kind of solemnity almost. Like, oh my God, here they are.
Where have you been?
No. I mean, they mostly occurred in relationships that were difficult, and I think very karmic. You know,
Really?
The first time I met an ex of mine, I was like, whoa. But I also knew, you know, and one of my first mentors, I knew. One of my closest friends now, I knew too, and that's always been lovely. You know, it just happened.
But it was a knowing.
It was a knowing, yeah, and there was no evidence, really. But then, you know, you still have to do things like have experience and build trust. So
Sure.
that first rush was carried with it another flavor of this is important.
Right.
But I haven't had the experience of walking into a room and sort of knowing what everybody's up to or at, where they're at. When I read people, I have to intend to do that. You know, I would have to and I never read from my friends, you know. I mean, I don't tune in. Like if I'm getting stood up in a restaurant, I might go, okay, where's John? And tune into John and see if he's stuck in the car or blew me off or whatever. But I don't do that when I walk into a room. It's just too much. I can't do it.
Right. I guess it'd be overload.
Yeah.
And that's
I've also never tried, truthfully.
But that's also kind of a fail-safe. It would be almost like Superman when he hears the entire world coming in at you at the same time.
Yeah.
He actually had to learn to quiet it down to be able to function on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
So something similar with you. How can and I love to hear the guide's thoughts on this. How can we balance all this lovely stuff we're talking about, spirituality, and living in the real world, the material world?
They're saying this is the real world. Everything is other. If you think of it as other, it will never be the real world. It will always be a fantasy. How you walk around the block, how you treat your neighbor, how you treat your neighbor, how you bathe the dog, how you bathe the dog. That is all your spiritual practice. That is all your spiritual practice. God is wherever you are. God is wherever you are, and whatever you're doing, and whatever you're doing. To make it special as a religious service, is not useful in this way. How you live your life, who you know you are. As of source, what you are as an expression of source, and how you serve, which is how you are as expressed in your actions, in your field is how you live. You are as of source, no matter where you are. This is the real world. Everything else is the illusion. We're not saying that. We are not saying that to diminish your experience of the manifest world, to diminish your experience of the manifest world. But when you come as your spiritual self, your presence informs the physical world. Your presence informs the physical world and indeed alters it. That is our teaching.
Do the guides ever get frustrated with what they're seeing in our evolution?
I don't know. You know, they sound like it sometimes, but I don't know. I really have wondered about this. You know, whether or not that's for a dramatic effect in oration. I mean, they're good teachers, but they gave a long lecture yesterday to, you know, whoever was there, 100 people or so, about the need to justify past acts, the need for, I can't remember the whole thing, but it was basically a teaching about the futility of war. And
it is.
You know, and they were not yelling, but it was an impassioned oratory. It was an impassioned speech. Well, they've done it before, but mostly they do it around things that seem to have to do with how we treat one another. That's what gets them. I don't know if, let me ask, not frustration. It's not frustration. They're saying it's not frustration, it's an attempt to convince you of your folly when you refuse to see the truth of your acts, when you refuse to see the truth of your acts, period.
Very much like a parent with a child.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense, because, you know, when you see your kid is about to put their hand in the fire and you've told them, it's going to burn you, and they have to learn the lesson of putting their hand in the fire before they figure out, ooh, fire's hot, even though you tried to avoid for them to deal with that. I guess on a grand scale, they're looking at humanity in that way.
Correct. That's incorrect.
Paul, tell me, do you remember anything about this book and what teachings are going to be in it for people?
Well, I mean, this book, I think, is about the application of the teaching as it relates to physical reality.
Which is the question I just asked, essentially.
Yeah, that's really what this is about. It's not about, I think they've begun this last series of books. Most of the lectures begin, I think, with like in a realized state or in an awakened state. They're teaching to the aspect of us that is realized and already knows, and then teaching us how we apply everything that they've taught as it relates to how a world is made new. Now, they say a world is made new less from the work of our hands than through the collective consciousness that we hold and the meaning that we give things. So when we all decide, for example, that we can no longer continue as we have, perhaps we change, but perhaps we don't have to experience a train wreck of a reality in order to get there. So I think they're teaching, well, let me see what they want to say about this. We will only say one thing. We will only say one thing. The book itself is an oracle. The book itself is an oracle and a treatise in being, and a treatise in being in the high octave, for the benefit of all one encounters, for the benefit of all one encounters. When you begin to vibrate at a level of tone, when you begin to vibrate at a level of tone where what you encounter is called to you, or what you encounter is called to you, to be reclaimed or reknown, to be reclaimed or reknown in the high order of the upper room, you are doing the work of love. You are doing the work of love, and you're doing the work of the source of all things, and you're doing the work of the source of all things. Come as you, come as you. Indeed, God sees God. Indeed, God sees God in all of its creations, in all of its creations. When you operate as the true self, when you operate as the true self, you are not discriminating. You are not discriminating, deciding who's allowed in, deciding who's allowed in, who is worthy of love, who is worthy of love, and who you should buy your purse from, and who you should hide your purse from. You are realizing yourself. You are realizing yourself at a level of tone, where the manifestation of the world is altered by your encounter with it, is altered by your encounter with it. That is what we teach. That is what we teach. You all have the ability to do this. You all have the ability to do this. You must say yes. You must say yes and say I am willing, and say I am willing to serve, period. They're saying period.
Beautiful, beautiful. And finally, Paul, do the guides have any last crucial message they would like to give this audience and the world in many ways?
We would say one thing. There is no need to fight over what will never be solved through fighting. There is no need to war over what will never be justified, over what will never be justified through war. There is every need to love your neighbor, to lift the one beside you, to know that she is worthy, to know that she is worthy, that he is worthy, regardless of who she is, regardless of who you think she is, or what he has done, or what he has done. When you all stand together and face the light, the light will shine and alter you. The light will shine and alter you. You will not do this. You will not do this when you are seeking to subvert. When you are seeking to subvert or hide from the light because you are frightened of it, Allow God to be God. Allow God to be God, whatever that God is to you. It's a good first step. And put down your swords. Period.
And on that note, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find out more about you, your new book, and the work that you're doing in the world?
My website's my name. It's just Paul Selig, SELIG.com. And the book's available in September on all major booksellers and online. You can get it anywhere. And I do a lot of events, so I'm channeling online every week. And I do an online intensive once a month, a five-day series. All of that's on the website, and I'm touring. So I'll be in different places around the world, for the next several months and for the unforeseeable future.
And how are you handling all that?
I enjoy it. I'm grateful. I live in the rainforest now, and I don't know how to drive. It's really ridiculous, and I can barely cook, and I live in the jungle, and I love it. But it's good to get out of the house. So this gets me out of the house. And if I can finish this memoir that I started and I'm supposed to be done in a few months, I'll be much, much happier. because right now I've got all these trips and I'm supposed to be home diligently writing away, and I'm actually relieved not to be. So I'm very happy to be out of the house.
And you are writing.
I'm writing this book. The next book I'm trying to write myself, yeah. The guides are threatening to start their own book any minute now, so I may be doing two at once. They've given me the heads up that they're ready to go.
I want to thank you and the guides for coming, and it's been such a pleasure having you here at the studio. So thank you, my friend, for everything you're doing to awaken the planet.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.